Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast, and today we have a very special guest who's one of our OG members of Peak 1.0. Watene, how are you, great man?
I'm very well, thank you. Sean and Jamie, pleasure to be here.
Jay, you're all good?
Good, ready to go.
Bit of a chaotic morning. We won't delve into it, but kids a little bit wild. It's a lot of mess, but we've managed to put that aside and super stoked to have you down, great man. We appreciate you spending some time with us here this morning. And I think where we need to start this is you're actually our first member who I didn't know. You know, traditionally, obviously, you know, we opened our facility at Peak 1.0 in early 2019, and as I guess most businesses start out with, is you've got your mates or colleagues or people that you've worked with previously. So we had 20 members. I think Jamie was sitting at home getting ready for a wedding. I was sitting at a desk with no members, like twiddling my thumbs trying to figure out how we draw people in. And then this beautiful man walked through the door. Do you want to maybe take our listeners back to how that eventuated?
Yeah, so basically it's quite a funny story, and it's like the stars aligned, actually. So I think I had someone who was doing your TVs or installing some TVs come in and
give a big shout out to Johnny Liambus. He's done and all of our IT work here as well. So thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it, mate.
So he came in and, trying to put my salesman hat on, want to build a bit of rapport, and he tells me about this fitness sort of gym that's opening up down the road, or a performance centre that's opening up down the road, and it was sort of right down my alley. It's for the sport I compete in, and I asked him a few questions, and I sort of said, "Oh, I'll pop down," and came down, and I was greeted by just as beautiful man, Sean there, and happy ever after since then.
Oh, that's funny. We didn't prep this, but I forgot that story. That's how it came about. I remember John walking back in and saying, "I think I've just got you a member." I was like, "What do you mean?"
I thought he was taking the piss at the time, to be honest with you. No, so we're super grateful that you took a risk on us, and you've been with us ever since. So again, you're at the real lifeblood of everything that Peak is, and we're so grateful to see your smiling face walk through the doors all the time. So let's maybe just scratch a little bit deeper into that. You sort of talked about your sport. I think the unique aspect to where we'll take this discussion today is that you're involved in combat sport, obviously boxing, as you can see maybe potentially on the screen there, plastered across your chest. Talk to us about how you got into that and how potentially the S&C side of things has helped to support that.
Yeah, so I sort of got into the sport a bit different to most people. Like a lot of kids are sort of put into it by their parents, or, they started at a sort of a young age. But for myself, I didn't start, I didn't have my first fight till I was 21. So it was a bit of a late bloomer. But I just wanted that, sort of something different for fitness. Like you'll probably see a lot of people, they're sort of in and out of the gym, and, sometimes just going and lifting some weights isn't enough, to get them coming back. So I found boxing was, really fun. It was, a lot of cardio, but it was also like the sparring. It was sort of challenging mentally and physically, and sort of got into that training and stuff like that. And 6 months later, I found myself in the ring. So, and then just continued on from there, really. So
amazing. Yeah, it's a completely different sort of world, the combat sport world. I guess there's some essence potentially of like an old school approach that is progressively sort of evolving, like a lot of sports. But I think definitely, I'm sure you've met some pretty old school coaches that would love to flog the guts out of you from session to session. Not a heap of periodization, but we're obviously seeing that change now, and we're seeing probably a lot of sports have that sports science integration into it. How have you seen in your, let's say the short time you've been in, because you said you're a late bloomer, how have you seen it evolve in terms of strength and conditioning potentially?
Yeah, well, a lot of like, as you see in the industry now, it's about periodization and sort of try not to burn out, and you can't redline every session. But sort of when I started, it was like, run 10Ks regularly. There wasn't these 90 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or, that high intensity stuff. It was, especially in boxing, it was like a lot of Rocky movie sort of type strength and conditioning. So it was 10Ks and 15K runs and stuff like that. Where today it's much more specific, especially like amateur boxing. It's 3 times 3 minute rounds. So those sort of 10K runs ain't going to benefit you too much. Like they're good here and there, but it's more that short and sharp intensity and the HIIT sort of style training as well, which is more beneficial for us.
From
amateur
my
boxers.
from my understanding, potentially some of that more quote unquote old school boxing style stuff could be a bit more about that building resilience. And I
Yeah.
guess there is an element to combat sport and boxing that like you're literally in a ring facing another human and you're gonna, potentially
Yeah.
box the crap out of each other. So where do you think, that sits in? Obviously, you've had that exposure through Sean and through some of your more high level experiences with the AIS and in New Zealand as well. Where do you personally sit with the balance of that? Do you
Yeah.
still think there's a place for some that more sort of old school approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on it, like the mental adaptations that you get from that sort of training are probably a lot more beneficial than the physical adaptations you'll get from, say, a 10K run or, skipping for 20 minutes straight and then shadowboxing with 3 kilo dumbbells and stuff like that. Like there is a place for that to build that resilience and that mental toughness that you need in such a mentally demanding sport. But probably more so just for that than the physical adaptations that you'll get, especially with like the modern day approach to strength and conditioning and stuff like that. There's much more physical benefits to the more modern day approach than that putting on a sweatsuit and going for a 10-mile run.
And Sean, as an S&C coach, I guess my question to tie that in with someone who experiences it would be, how do you balance that? Is there a place for that, or would you just say I actually, from an S&C perspective, wouldn't recommend it? How do you still target that mental aspect of a combat sport without physically impacting them?
Thanks for the question, Jamie.
No
I appreciate it.
worries.
I'm feeling very special right now. Look, to be honest with you, each S&C coach that you talk to probably has a differing opinion on this. I feel like I sit in the middle. I'm almost like a bit of a fence sitter because I think that, yes, absolutely, load management in all sports is super important. I think that our ability to be able to schedule and appropriately load and provide it and dose intensities at different stages has been a huge improvement for a lot of athletes in terms of keeping them healthy. However, I do think that sometimes we go too far in that direction. I think I keep using the word continuum because it's a bit of a buzzword in a number of aspects at the moment, but I feel like you've got your continuum of load management and sports science over here, and then you've got the old school resilience. Like back when at the Port Magpies underage days when we were doing push-ups on our knuckles in the car park if we lost the game, and everything in between. I think sometimes we lose that mental resilience if we go too far that way, whether that be for specific situations within the competition that you play. I think that there can sometimes be a tendency, without sounding like an old man, but maybe with some of the younger generations coming through as well, as maybe not performing in certain circumstances because all of the variables weren't controlled perfectly, because that's what happens in training. There's no sort of versatility to be able to deviate away from that. Again, I know we mention him all the time, but I think sort of Burjo's been pretty strong on promoting that to us, is that storytelling is a big part of it as well. And if you select the appropriate times to put in some of those harder, more, there's the classic Port Adelaide example of the 100 hundreds, which is crazy in terms of that sports science loading perspective, but everybody got through okay. The high performance staff at that time deciphered that it was an okay enough risk to sort of work through at that point in time. And if anything was to go wrong, there's enough time prior to season to rehab appropriately, get them back. However, that was like a focal point for them to draw back on from a mental resilience perspective and say, hey, we got through 10Ks of sprinting in Dubai in 100% humidity and those sorts of things too. So I think, without being boring, it's like in most of my answers is I think consistency is super important. I think that being in the middle of sports science loading, but also developing mental resilience is important too. So what I would probably say is it's the coaches or S&C coaches' job to figure out when the best time to do that was. And probably, as a very generalized rule of thumb, that might be in the middle point of your pre-season or preparation, where you build up appropriately to this big resilience building event, whatever that might be, and then you deload appropriately, and then you've got that to draw back on for sure.
On that, what's the craziest thing you feel you've done in that sort of resilience training space?
I couldn't really pinpoint something specific, like one activity that I've done that's just been like, that was a nightmare. But I think it's like just consistently redlining it, so that can like day in, day out, pushing myself probably a little bit further than I should, as opposed to just one specific thing that I've done. Just trying to think probably it could be if I had to sort of go back and to one specific activity that I've done it was actually a fight week. So you're normally meant to sort of taper, but our coach has sort of taken us down at the time, and it's like 38 degrees, and he's like snake pit, and there's no how many reps are we doing? But it's you do your first one, and then it's like everyone from now on has to be within 10 seconds of that, and after you get through like sort of 10 reps, and I think they're about 400 meters, you're about 4Ks in, running in sand, 40-degree heat. And but it wasn't the end of it. And then obviously your time starts like slipping outside that 10 seconds that the first one was done. And you get to 15 and you're sort of like, nearly about to cry, you're about to vomit, you got blisters on your feet. And then it's still not done. And then you get to 20 and you're like, we've just done 8Ks. I've got a fight on Saturday. I've been eating next to nothing, basically salad, because I'm fighting and my weight's a bit, iffy. So that was probably one specific thing I could highlight.
That's pretty full on.
That's crazy. How did you go in the fight? Did you win?
I did. It was actually my first fight that I had here in South Australia after having my original ones in Northern Territory, like where I started. So
wow, that's crazy. I guess just on the snake pit quickly, for anybody who doesn't know, it's synonymous. It's a 500-meter hill track. Before I delve deeper into yours, I just want to tell a quick story, only because it gives another shout out to a few of our sort of peak crew here. But again, it was an old Port Adelaide a tradition that the session prior to Christmas, they'd go down the snake pit, and Adrian Setri, who's one of our members here now, would be the man who sort of facilitated that, who we love dearly, and I credit a lot of my knowledge to him. Anyway, you do whatever it was, you're carrying barrels and tyres and each other and those sorts of things, and always the last lap had to be a lap where you take a mouthful of water. It's nasal breathing around the track.
You'd be absolutely starved.
I'd be
Sean's
done,
nose is that broken. The noises that come out of his mouth at night time are like ungodly.
I'd be done on the first corner. But if you could get across the line and spit your water out, then you didn't have to do another one. If you had swallowed it along the way, you had to do an additional lap. Anyway, a guy, Louis Sharrett, who now plays at the Port Districts Footy Club, who we're really tightly associated with, he's got up the second hill and swallowed it. And I won't tell you the words he was saying because we'd have to bleep it out a few times, but it was like, he was stressing out. Anyway, he looks around, scoops up a handful of sand, whips it in his mouth, finishes the lap, spits sand out. And I think that Sets was so shocked at the end, he just didn't even worry about it. He's like, that's fine, mate. I'm happy
kind
with
of
that.
impressive.
Yeah,
that's
that's enough punishment.
Let's delve deeper into that. Obviously, I guess there is some controversy around the way that fighters, combat sport athletes get to weight. So let's talk a bit about what weight you would be in a day-to-day scenario, just walking around here today.
Yep.
What weight you traditionally sort of fight at.
Yep.
How do you get down to that weight? How do you feel? And what's sort of your nutrition like as well around those times?
So, first things first, I'm an amateur boxer, so it's a little bit different to, say, professionals. So in the Olympic sort of style resume, you weigh in and fight on the same day. So you're sort of not allowed, you don't really want to be too far off weight day to day. Otherwise, you're fighting in 3 or 4 day competitions and you got to make weight every day. You want to be sort of close within that sort of 5% specifically for me. I'd like to stay. So I fight at 60 kilos. So if I was anything over 63, I'd be a bit sort of panicked, coming into fight week. So I'll generally sort of try to stay around that 62, 61 and a half kilo range, but that hasn't always been the case, Bakes. You've dealt with me when I've been 65, 66 and it's Tuesday and I got a fight on Saturday, and it's probably a good reason why my hairline's receded as it is. I'm not even 30. So that's probably contributed a lot of stress. But yeah, generally, my advice to any sort of combat sport athlete is try and be as disciplined as you can to come into fight week. So you're not you don't want to come into fight week and your fight is making the weight, like you want to be able to make sure that you are ready to compete and mentally focused on just that on a Saturday.
So obviously, you talked about like eating salads. Everybody knows about sort of saunas and running around in sweatsuits, those sorts of things. Have you ever yourself or worked or trained alongside anybody who's come into sort of any trouble? There's a few, I guess, key instances of some bad things that have happened to people. Have you ever seen that, if you don't mind me asking? And how's that been to sort of be around?
Yeah, well, thankfully I haven't seen anyone sort of have any too harsher consequences from weight cutting, but it is a really sort of touchy subject in the combat space because the people have sort of lost their lives from pushing it a bit too far and sitting in saunas for too long. And I guess that generally happens in the weigh-ins that are 24 hours before the event. So like your professional boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, because they can afford to lose a bit more weight and then fight, have that 24 to 36 hour window to rehydrate and rejuvenate their bodies and stuff like that. But like any scenarios I've seen, it's always myself pushing it a bit too far and struggling. I remember sort of back in 2019, having to sort of lose 3 kilos after I've just fought because I got another fight tomorrow, or coming into fight week 6 kilos over and sitting in a sauna for the last 4 hours before I weigh in. So yeah, fortunately it's just been me and not having to see anyone else witness it was sort of good.
From a nutritional perspective, obviously if you said you came to the sport a little bit later and that weight cutting was maybe something that you hadn't had heaps of exposure or experience to, did you just play around with things yourself? Did you seek any advice for that? How did that look for you?
Yeah, I started off obviously it's in hindsight it's a great thing. If I sort of knew now what I know now back then, it would have helped a lot. And just in my sort of last year at Nationals, both the Australian and New Zealand Nationals, I was 61 kilos on fight week. I think my last weigh-in I weighed in at 59.2, so I was clean and clear and a lot more disciplined. But I sort of had to research and learn that myself, and I had to put a lot of time into that because I knew I was probably expending a lot of energy mentally and physically just trying to make the weight, and it was sort of showing in my performances as well. So just making sure that I was disciplined and trying to stay away from the sort of McFlurry specials and stuff like that sort of went a long way to helping, and it goes a long way mentally, I think, as well, because you're not worried about making the weight or stressing out about it. You're sort of more focused on the fight and what you have to do to be best prepared for that. So
I've always loved that you've had the ability to sort of poke fun at yourself, which I think is a great trait in people. And we've had some laughs, I guess, across our journey, and the way you've probably, we can be transparent, you've yo-yoed with your weight, as we've sort of talked about. There's been times where, as you said, you weighed in at 59 kilos and then your first stop after the fight was straight to KFC afterwards. How have you gone about, I guess, avoiding those yo-yos? And was that a bit of a mental challenge to sort of work your way through that? Because I think you're certainly not alone in that. We see a lot of people just in everyday life, with a number of things happening. Yours is probably exacerbated because you're training and dieting so intensely to get to this sort of specific weight. We see people that will go on a 6-week or 8-week challenge and have a great sort of body composition change, and then will go back to similar to what they were before, sometimes even potentially further back than what they'd be hoping. What's your sort of your mindset around that, and do you have any advice potentially for those who do struggle with yo-yoing?
I think it's more to do with your lifestyle around nutrition and stuff like that. You'd know yourself, trying to make sure you're making the right choices when it comes to food and nutrition. And it doesn't mean if you go army mentality into it and have that sort of I only can eat this and this amount of calories, it's probably going to be detrimental because it's not sustainable. So you're probably going to yo-yo and be up and down and stuff like that. So I think if you can find a balance, a healthy balance, that's probably your best bet, because a lot of these people, like you said, you go into those 8-week challenges, you're dialed in, you're locked in, and but as soon as that is over and you don't have to, you're not going through that anymore, you're just going to go back to your old habits and sort of yo-yo up. So you've almost wasted that 8 weeks, right? So I guess it's finding, a good balanced nutritional diet that includes the sweet treat and stuff like that we all sort of crave at times. And that's fine. It's not you have for me, it's not like you can't have that. It's just the next day, to get back on your calorie target and stuff like that, as opposed to just going down the rabbit hole. Like, you'll miss one day and then the next day you're like, oh, I screwed up yesterday, I'll start again on Monday. And so many people fall into that trap. So if you can find a sort of nice, healthy, balanced lifestyle, then it should be good for you.
Have you found a difference since you've been able to tweak your nutrition a little bit in how you feel in performance? As I think, obviously, that's not Sean and I's space specifically in nutrition, but I talked about in my episode in terms of exercise for me. Wasn't when I focused on not my body composition, but when I focused on how it makes me feel, that I think that gives you a real drive to not focus on I'm doing this for image base. So have you found, a difference in your performance level when you fuel correctly?
Yeah, I have a major difference. And I think, like you said, that mindset or that mind frame around like performance, like eating for performance, is sort of a lot healthier than sort of for body image and look and stuff like that. So that's helped a lot. It also is a bit tricky with like combat sport as well, because it's probably like the only sport where you're coming up to your competition time or your game and you're sort of decreasing calories. You speak to any sort of footy player, basketball player, maybe even netball players, like they want to have a big pasta before game day, but sort of for boxing, it's like you got to do the opposite because you're trying to watch your weight. But in day to day, you definitely want to be eating for performance, and that mindset as well for performance. When you sort of reframe it to like it's your body, your temple, and you sort of want to perform the best you can. You don't want to be putting like 91 in your engine. Like, you want to put 98 in it to get the best out of it. So, I think that's a really healthy way to look at nutrition and stuff like that.
Now, people can obviously hear the twang in that voice there, mate. Talk to us about like your balance between New Zealand and Australia here. How did you end up over here? Because even I don't know that, to be honest with you. And how you've represented, I guess, different countries and states and so on and so forth.
Yep. So I sort of came here just over 10 years ago, like fresh out of high school. Sort of my mum's friends, sort of, and my mum had a conversation one day, and I probably wasn't like going down the best track, if I'm being honest. Post school, I had just finished. They were a little bit worried. Like, I sort of was like, oh, I won't go to uni or anything like that. I'll have a gap year. But sort of my mum was like, I don't think that's a good idea. So we're friends in that. They actually put me on a plane to Alice Springs.
Yeah, wow.
So, yep, they sort of...
Willing or unwillingly?
Well, it was sort of willingly. If I knew where Alice Springs was, it would have been unwillingly.
Yeah, wow. And where do you come from in New Zealand?
I'm from a place called Napier, so it's sort of like central North Island, but on the east coast, so a nice little
I'm guessing it's
town.
fairly green in
Very,
comparison to Alice Springs.
Oh, very. And like, I just flew back from there yesterday, and like, even just the whole country is just beautiful and nice and green. And sort of even South Australia, it's a bit dry over here at the moment as well. So no, it's a very a beautiful place, and it's always good to go back. But it was a bit of an eye opener, like going to Alice Springs, and I was sort of naive because I just thought, well, like in the weekends I'll just go to Sydney, I'll just go to Brisbane, go to Townsville, it'll be right. But it wasn't the case.
So talk to me. You land in Alice Springs. What are you doing there? And then how did you end up down this side of the world?
Yeah, so it was like my Harvey Norman journey. So I sort of obviously started working for Harvey Norman there, and I spent a good few years there. And the franchisee at the time, who's still a really good mate of mine to this day, he sort of eventually ended up getting the Woodville shop, which is obviously how I got the Peak relationship. And as soon as he moved, then I came with him and ended up down in beautiful South Australia.
In terms of boxing, though, so you've represented your country for New Zealand, which is amazing, and then you've also had the ability to sort of compete in like our state competitions here as well. What does that look like, and what are some of your best achievements just sort of in that world?
Yeah, so it's been like an interesting balance between that, because like I obviously spent a bit of time at the AIS last year because I am eligible now for Australian citizenship, which is something like sort of I am looking at. It just makes it a lot easier as opposed to travelling back. Like it's a lot of time and money and energy sort of going back to New Zealand for training camps and like all the New Zealand competitions, which I still go back for all the major ones. But being a South Australian resident, it is something I'm looking at to transition over. But I competed in all like One New Zealand Nationals and sort of New Zealand Golden Gloves, Australian Golden Gloves, Australian Club Championships, obviously local, like state champions, like South Australian champion and stuff like that, have won those as well. So it's been good to witness both. Like Australia has a much larger talent pool of amateur boxing, so it's actually been really good to fight sort of the best here, and then obviously go back into New Zealand. You're probably like that little bit level above because you're in this sort of high performance environment where there's a lot more competition here. So.
And last year, you got some funding. So I guess probably before we maybe even delve into that, what is like a day-to-day, like while you're training, working at Harvey Norman and then getting some S&C work in? What did your day look like? Because I think it's important to sort of get a scope of that. And then how do you lead to then getting 18 months of funding as well?
Yeah, so obviously my whole boxing career, I sort of worked and tried to train twice a day, 6 days a week, and it is a bit of a stretch. It can be done, but it's a lot of sacrifice on sort of relationships, and if you're hard to you can't really go out and socialise and stuff like that because either you got work the next day or you got to train that night. There's no sort of spare time, and it's also hard like juggling like your nutrition and stuff like that as well because you're working sort of 8 hours a day. You got to train after work, and then you got to get enough sleep before you get up to train before your work the next day as well, which is quite the challenge, but it can be done. I guess if you want it enough, you can find that time. But over time, you probably still burn out, and that's sort of probably the main catalyst. I had a bit of a break from the sport after sort of like I missed out on the Commonwealth Games in 2022. It was like take a bit of a break, but thankfully, like upon my return, I sort of had the opportunity to be able to train and not work and stuff like that for the sort of last 18 months, which is made a massive difference to my performance, and you've probably seen that in like the achievements and stuff like that, like all the major competitions and stuff like that I've done really well in, and being able to dedicate that time to just boxing has been really beneficial.
Amazing.
Apologies for my naivety, but you keep saying you're an amateur boxer, but it also sounds like you're involved in some high performance environments. So what I know about you is you're fairly modest as well. So it could be a component of that. But explain to me, how do the sort of like levels of boxing, like how does it actually work?
So the best way to explain it, because you say to someone like amateur boxer and they're probably sort of like, oh, he must be not very good. But like amateur boxing is sort of like, if you're an amateur, you can go to the Olympics, go to the Commonwealth Games, but as soon as you sort of switch over to professional, you can't do that anymore. You're not considered an amateur boxer anymore. So the thing with professional boxing is there actually no barrier to entry. So for example, if Sean sort of wanted to lace up the gloves and have a professional boxing fight next weekend, he could do that. But if Sean wanted to sort of, I guess, go in the sort of Australian Nationals and New Zealand Nationals as an amateur boxer, he'd have to go through the relevant qualifying events.
Right.
And then also have a certain amount of fights as well. Like, I've had 40-odd amateur bouts, which people would say, well, that's a lot. But, just last year I had sort of 17 of them in 1 year, which you can do because you have, 3 times 3-minute rounds. You have multi-day competitions as well. So it's, pretty easy to get sort of 3 fights in 3 days. Mm-hmm. But if you're a pro boxer, some of the rounds are a bit longer as well. So you go to 10-round and 12-round fights, which you couldn't really do back-to-back. So that's the sort of main difference between the two sports.
And am I right in saying of more money in professional boxing potentially? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's prize fighting. So you get sort of paid for every sort of fight, where in the amateurs you don't get paid. Like you could win Australian Nationals and you get $0. So it's all based on sponsorship and performance pathways that provide the funding for the athletes.
Now, I know you joked about me pulling on the gloves before. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I think the closest thing I've ever got to a punch is maybe a jumper punch in football, which doesn't really count. Talk to me about that mindset when you are walking towards a ring, knowing that there's somebody on the other side who wants to knock your head off or have you carried out of that ring. I couldn't even imagine it, to be honest with you. Talk to me. What's that mindset like? Yeah,
it's interesting. It's like an alter ego because you guess Watene as the person, most people would probably say I'm generally friendly and stuff like that, and I am. That's who I am. But you sort of have to switch into the alter ego, and I'm just a competitor. I hate to lose. So whatever it is, whether it's a game of chess or it's a game of pool. If I lose, I'm disappointed, and so when I enter in the sort of boxing ring, it's a different person. Like, I would look at myself, and even when I spar, like, you know, I'm so competitive. It could just be a light spar, but I'll talk to you and let you know, like, I'm here. I want to go, like, I don't know. I just switch into another person and have that mentality, I guess, like, yeah, kill or be killed. Like, you know, I'm not going to let you beat me. And especially, like, it's a fight. Every man probably has that little bit of him that, like, wants to know how to box. Or, you know, you see a lot of that, like, alpha male sort of energy, which will never carry outside the ring for me personally, but inside that ring, it's like, yeah, I'm here to win, and I'll win at any cost.
Amazing. And what's our goals from here? Just to wrap up, you know, where do you want this journey to sort of take you? Where do you see it taking you?
For me, like, I guess, like, I'm a realist as well. Like, I really think that my future in the sport is in coaching. Yeah, personally, because you know, the next Commonwealth Games is next year, which is, you know, something that I could definitely eye up. But I actually have a lot more interest in coaching and helping, like, the young fighters coming up not make the same mistakes I had, and I guess, you know, be there for them, because I know how much sacrifice you put into get into the ring and stuff like that. So I guess my future in the sport, like, if I had to say 10 years down the track, I'd love to be a, you know, state national coach, and help the next generation come through. That would be sort of the ideal picture for me.
Amazing. Well, I think that anybody who had the opportunity to be coached by you would be very, very lucky. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. And, you know, as I said, if it wasn't for people like you who came through our doors and trusted in us and, you know, became an incredible, an integral part of our community, you know, we wouldn't be what we are today, mate. So we appreciate you. We hope that we're sitting there watching you at the Commonwealth Games next year, and really excited to see where this journey takes you, mate. So thanks for your time. And if you are in the gym, make sure you come and say good day to the great man and talk to him more about his journey.
Thank you, Sean and Jamie, for having me on. Bit of imposter syndrome, having you know, the greats on. I know you've had sort of Brody, and you also had Walshy in here as well. I heard Big Jars has been on too, so bit intimidated, but no, it's cool. Thanks, I appreciate it a lot.
Our pleasure, mate.
Cheers.
So there you have it. One of our OGs, Watene. What a wonderful man he is. My two key takeaways are, number one, for those who do deal with yo-yoing, a way to work yourself out is try to find as much consistency, particularly with nutrition, as possible. And then number two, which we saw in Brody Smith's episode as well, is, you know, that alter ego. Find that alter ego for competition so you can really maximize your performance, and also make sure it doesn't spill out into your everyday life as well.